Let's dive into something truly fundamental today. You know that feeling when you're caught in the delicate dance of a new relationship, trying to figure out if you're putting in just enough effort or perhaps too much?
Uh-huh. That tricky balance.
Or maybe you've wondered why some people seem to latch onto their goals with an unwavering grip, while others find their resolve evaporating with the slightest temptation.
Yeah, definitely seen that.
And then there are teachers tirelessly shaping young minds whose choices in the classroom are often guided by philosophies they may not even consciously articulate.
Right, these sort of underlying beliefs.
Today, we're taking a deep, illuminating plunge into the intricate world of human behavior, motivation, and the complex decisions that underpin our lives. We've got a stack of sources here that, at first glance, might seem like they belong in completely different libraries, but I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you'll see how they weave together to reveal some truly surprising insights about why we humans do what we do.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We're going to uncover how core concepts, like the very nature of commitment and the power of individual belief systems, don't just exist in isolation.
Okay.
Instead, they manifest across vastly different human experiences, from the invisible scaffolding that holds our daily interactions together, to the nuanced dynamics within educational settings, and even into the often misunderstood landscape of modern romantic pursuit.
Wow, okay, quite the range.
We'll be dissecting cutting-edge research that illuminates not just what these behaviors are, but critically why they matter to us, and the underlying mechanisms that drive them.
Right.
Our goal is to give you a unique, accelerated pathway to being genuinely well-informed on these intricate patterns of human action.
Our mission for you today, then, is to extract the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge from these diverse sources. We're going to kick things off by grappling with the very idea of commitment itself, exploring its philosophical and psychological layers.
Good place to start.
Then we'll shift gears to see how foundational educational philosophies profoundly shape decisions in the classroom, impacting both teachers and students. And finally, we'll tackle a decidedly modern and sometimes uncomfortable topic: the intriguing world of excessive romantic behaviors, often colloquially termed simping. So get ready to connect some truly unexpected dots. The intricacies of commitment, a philosophical and psychological deep dive. So let's begin at the bedrock, with the foundational concept illuminated by our first source, commitment. It sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Like something we all understand intuitively.
Seems straightforward.
But delve deeper, and you realize it's actually a cornerstone, an absolute non-negotiable for human social life to function. Why is it so essential, and what profound things does it actually do for us?
Well, our sources emphasize that commitments are what make individual behavior predictable.
Predictable. How
Yeah.
so?
Think about it. Imagine a world where you couldn't count on anyone to follow through on their word, or even on unspoken agreements. Planning a simple dinner with friends would become a nightmare of uncertainty.
We're at total chaos.
How could you coordinate a joint project at work if you couldn't rely on your colleagues to deliver their part?
Right.
This predictability is not just helpful, it is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
It's the glue that allows us to rely on each other day in and day out.
So it's about that basic reliance.
Precisely. And this reliance, this expectation that others will generally stick to their plans and intentions, contributes to the very fabric of human social institutions. It's truly astonishing when you consider it.
Like what kind of institutions?
We're talking about fundamental structures like jobs, where you commit your time and skills, and your employer commits to compensation. Or money itself, which relies entirely on a collective commitment to its value. Imagine if one day everyone collectively decided a dollar bill was just a piece of paper.
Yeah, wouldn't work anymore.
Governments, legal systems, even something as personal and profound as marriage. These intricate human structures would simply crumble into chaos without the underlying predictability and willingness to rely on mutual commitments. What's equally fascinating is how often these commitments are implicit, unspoken. We rarely explicitly state, I commit to valuing this currency, or I commit to my role in society.
Right, you just do.
Yet those silent underlying motivations are always there, subtly, powerfully driving our actions.
That makes incredible sense. It's the invisible architecture of our world. But this brings up a crucial question. How do we even begin to identify and assess the level of our own commitments, let alone gauge them in others?
That's the tricky part, isn't it? Our sources highlight some critical distinctions that help us unpack this complexity, moving beyond the surface-level understanding.
Okay, like what?
Indeed. The first key distinction is between individual commitment and social commitment.
Okay, individual versus social. Got it.
Individual commitment is all about the internal process of settling on personal goals and intentions, making a firm decision to end deliberation and move forward.
So me deciding what I want for lunch.
Kinda, yeah. The source offers the relatable example of Frank, who's stuck between going to the cinema or the theater. His individual commitment kicks in the moment he decides on the cinema.
Okay.
That decision isn't just a preference, it's a mental act that helps him shut down endless wavering and shift into the planning phase, like figuring out the fastest metro route. It's about self-governance, about the internal robustness of his intention, ensuring his choice serves its purpose rather than leading to pointless reconsideration.
Right. Stops the endless second-guessing.
Now, social commitment, on the other hand, inherently involves at least two agents, and an action where one agent takes on an obligation to another.
Ah, so bringing other people in.
Exactly. It's an outward-facing commitment that creates expectations. A perfect illustration is Agnes committing to pick up Sam at the airport. This isn't just Agnes deciding internally to go to the airport. It establishes a clear obligation to Sam, who will now rely on her being there. It shifts from an internal decision to a shared understanding with reciprocal expectations.
I can see how those two are distinct, yet so intertwined. What about the nuances of why we commit? Our sources also break down commitment into its normative and psychological aspects.
Right. Good distinction. The normative aspect involves the obligations we feel, or the standards of rationality that apply.
Normative, like rules or shoulds.
Kind of. For social commitment, like Agnes picking up Sam, the normative aspect is clear. It involves obligations to another person. There's a moral or social expectation that she will follow through.
Okay.
For individual commitment, like Frank sticking to his cinema decision, the normative element relates to principles of practical rationality. If he keeps re-deliberating after making a firm choice, his initial decision hasn't served its rational purpose of guiding action. It's about being consistent with your own declared intentions.
So not contradicting yourself, basically.
Pretty much. In contrast, the psychological aspect refers to the actual mental state, the internal disposition, the motivational drive that propels us.
The feeling part.
Yeah, the inner engine. Think of Roger, the avid bird watcher. His commitment isn't just about a rule he follows. It's a powerful psychological motivation that compels him to invest significant time, money, and effort into his passion, and crucially, to actively resist other tempting alternatives, like sleeping in on a frosty Sunday morning when he could be out spotting a rare bird.
Got it. So it's the drive.
Exactly. And the sources wisely point out that these distinctions aren't always neatly separable. The objective isn't to force everything into a single, rigid theoretical package, but rather to provide a flexible framework for understanding how these different forms hang together and interrelate, showcasing the fluidity and complexity of human commitment.
That brings us to a fundamental challenge of human functioning, something our sources call limited motivational integration. It's an incredibly relatable concept once you hear it explained.
It truly is. This is a core assumption about how our minds work. Simply forming a goal, no matter how earnest, doesn't automatically make all the steps required to achieve it suddenly more rewarding than other alternatives.
Right. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, sort of thing.
Exactly. We are, quite simply, often tempted to act in ways that are inconsistent with our own longer-term goals. Think of it. Your brain might logically know that jogging is good for you, but at 6 a.m., that warm, cozy bed feels way more appealing than cold pavement.
Been there.
Or you commit to a healthy diet, but the second piece of cake suddenly becomes irresistible. That internal tug of war, that psychological difficulty in aligning our immediate impulses with our long-term intentions is precisely what limited motivational integration describes.
And this is where commitment steps in as a kind of psychological superhero, right?
Exactly. Commitment is positioned as a sophisticated functional device specifically designed to shield those longer-term goals from the constant barrage of short-term interest and fleeting impulses. It acts as a protective barrier, keeping us on track.
How does it do that? Like, what are the tricks?
Well, it employs several clever mechanisms of goal shielding. First, there's attentional control, which helps us mentally filter out irrelevant information. If you're committed to studying, you might unconsciously block out the tempting sounds of a TV in the next room.
Tuning things out. Okay.
Second, inhibitory control kicks in, preventing us from performing actions or even entertaining thoughts that aren't conducive to our goal. This is the willpower that stops you from hitting the snooze button or reaching for that second slice of pizza.
The don't do it mechanism.
Right. And third, there's effective control, which works by subtly enhancing positive emotions when we pursue our goal, making the effort feel more rewarding and dampening negative emotions that arise from resisting temptation.
Making the good choice feel better.
Exactly. Beyond these internal mental controls, we also employ conscious situational strategies. For example, if you know you're tempted by sweets at an office reception, you might strategically schedule an appointment immediately after the lecture to ensure you leave before the cake even comes out.
Proactive avoidance. Smart.
These strategies help us proactively manage our environment to support our commitments.
It sounds like a constant internal negotiation, doesn't it? This leads beautifully into the idea of how we manage to stick to our decisions, especially when new information or unexpected temptations pop up. It's not about blind stubbornness, but a really delicate balancing act.
It's absolutely a balancing act, and our sources label this as resistance to reconsideration. The point is that intentions need to be robust enough to serve their purpose. If Frank, looking at the Metro map, keeps re-deliberating about the cinema, his initial decision to go there served no real purpose.
Right, it becomes pointless.
But here's the crucial nuance. Intention shouldn't commit us unconditionally either. If, while Frank is at the metro station, he suddenly sees a sign that the line to the cinema is closed for repairs, it would be utterly irrational to just stubbornly stick to his original plan.
Of course. That'd be silly.
This is precisely the balancing act between pusillanimity and stubbornness that the sources emphasize.
Pusillanimity. Big word for just giving up too easily.
Yeah, basically being too wishy-washy versus just being pig-headed. To navigate this effectively, we employ something called the principle of partial reconsideration.
Okay. Partial reconsideration. How does that work?
When genuinely new, relevant information appears, you don't immediately abandon your plan. Instead, you begin to reconsider, making a quick preliminary assessment of how likely a different decision is to be better.
Just a quick check first.
Exactly. And you only continue with that full reconsideration if that initial likelihood exceeds a reasonable preset threshold. It's like a mental quick check before fully reopening the debate.
So it's about smart, efficient decision-making under uncertainty, not just blindly forging ahead. And the sources detail what factors influence that threshold for reconsideration, right?
Exactly. The appropriate threshold for reconsideration and how much preliminary assessment we do depends heavily on numerous contextual factors. Let's break a few down. First, stakes. If Roger the birdwatcher is trying to decide on the best spot to set up a critical shelter for survival, even a slight possibility of a better, safer plan should be thoroughly examined.
High stakes, more careful checking.
Right. But if he's just choosing between two types of binoculars, the stakes are low, so less thorough reconsideration is needed. So the resistance to reconsider is inversely proportional to the stakes.
Got it.
Second, time pressure. The time you spend reconsidering is time you could be spending on executing your current plan. If Roger is under extreme time pressure to build his shelter before a storm hits, he should be much less likely to pause and reconsider.
No time to waste.
Higher time pressure means higher resistance to reconsideration. Third, attentional requirements of the current task. If Roger is fully immersed and engaged in the highly intensive task of setting up the shelter frame, his resistance to reconsideration should be higher simply to avoid interfering with the concentration required for the task at hand.
Don't break the focus. Makes sense.
Fourth, certainty about costs and benefits of alternatives. If a new alternative emerges, like suddenly spotting a clearly abandoned sturdy hut nearby, that's unequivocally better than building a shelter from scratch. In such a clear-cut case, reconsideration is quicker and more appropriate.
Obvious win, switch plans.
But if the alternative is vague, uncertain, or only marginally better, resistance to reconsideration should be higher. Why waste mental energy on an uncertain, possibly inferior path?
Fair point.
Fifth, confidence in the original goal. If Roger was already quite unsure about his initial shelter plan from the start, then he should naturally be more open to alternatives. Conversely, more confidence in your original decision generally leads to higher resistance to rethinking it.
Trust your gut, if your gut felt good initially.
Sort of. Sixth, and this is truly crucial because it forms a platform for social commitment, is the dependence of further plans. If many other plans, personal or social, depend entirely on the current goal being achieved, then resistance to reconsideration should be much higher.
The domino effect.
Exactly. If Roger has already made arrangements to meet someone at his completed shelter in the morning, abandoning it would disrupt multiple subsequent plans, creating a significant ripple effect.
Okay, that's a big one.
Finally, others' awareness and reliance. This ties into the social aspect. If other people are aware of your decision and are actively relying on it, perhaps they're hiking to meet you at the shelter, then you are much less likely to reconsider.
Don't want to let people down.
This isn't just about personal consistency, it's about preserving relationships, maintaining your reputation, and avoiding the social cost of disappointing others.
Those contextual factors make so much sense. We intuitively apply them, often without realizing it. But here's where it gets really interesting and perhaps a bit counterintuitive. What about those times when simply starting something makes you more committed to finishing it, even if, rationally, you perhaps shouldn't?
Ah, yes. This is the realm of what our sources call mission creep and sunk costs. Sunk cost reasoning is the tendency to factor in past investments, time, money, effort when deciding on future actions, even if those past investments are unrecoverable and shouldn't, rationally, influence a future decision.
Like staying in a bad movie because you paid for the ticket.
Exactly that. Roger, for example, might stubbornly continue building his shelter frame, even if he spots much better, more suitable branches nearby, simply because he's already invested so much effort into the initial frame. He doesn't want to waste that past effort.
Even though starting over might be faster overall.
Right. Now, this is subtly different from soft commitment, which is the idea that merely beginning a behavioral pattern or being close to completing a task significantly increases the perceived value of seeing it through.
Okay, how's that different?
Think about a baseball game. If it starts raining in the ninth inning, when the game is nearly over, players are much more willing to play through it than if the rain started in the first inning.
So close to the end. Gotta finish.
The proximity to completion becomes a powerful motivator for continued effort, almost overriding discomfort. It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon.
So why does this mission creep happen? Why are we so prone to doubling down on something just because we've already started it?
Our sources hypothesize a few compelling reasons. One strong theory is that our prior actions, the act of selecting a goal, making plans, and physically initiating its pursuit, sends a powerful signal to ourselves that we genuinely value that activity or goal.
Like proving it to myself.
Kind of. It creates a sort of self-reinforcing loop. I've started this, so it must be important to me. Another hypothesis is that once you begin working towards a goal, you naturally start to form other plans that presuppose its completion.
Right, the domino effect again.
So abandoning the initial goal isn't just about giving up on one thing. It means disrupting a whole intricate web of subsequent plans that you've already laid out. It creates a cascading domino effect of undone intentions.
That makes sense.
And then there's a third, incredibly relatable hypothesis. It's simply taxing and psychologically fatiguing to maintain representations of unfinished goals in our minds.
The mental load of unfinished tasks.
Exactly. As the renowned philosopher William James famously observed, nothing is so fatiguing as the eternal hanging on of an uncompleted task. There's a profound sense of relief that comes with completing goals, and that desire for cognitive closure, for that feeling of relief, can powerfully drive us to persist, even when the rational case for stopping might be strong.
Interesting.
The sources suggest that this mission creep mechanism is quite basic, possibly even evolutionarily shared, acting as a fundamental way to resist reconsideration, and that adult humans then calibrate this innate tendency with more sophisticated cognition.
And it's this very basic mechanism of mission creep that provides a truly robust platform for understanding how social commitment forms, extending far beyond purely individual motivation.
Absolutely. When an individual invests significant effort in pursuing a goal, their actions don't just signal value to themselves. They also signal value to others that this goal is worthwhile.
Like leading by example.
In a way. This can lead to something fascinating called goal contagion, where others are more likely to adopt that goal for themselves simply by observing someone else pursuing it with determination.
Never heard of that.
Furthermore, by visibly persisting in a goal, you implicitly indicate its value and, crucially, invite reliance from others. They observe your continued effort, form expectations based on it, and begin to plan their own actions accordingly.
So my effort makes them count on me.
This dynamic further entrenches not only your commitment but also theirs, as they now have a vested interest. From this perspective, even something as formal as a promise can be viewed as a conventionalized first step in a sequence of actions.
A promise is just the start.
Yeah. Making a promise or explicitly stating an intention is an initial public action that creates expectations and invites reliance, broadening our understanding of commitment beyond strict formal definitions to include the fuzzier cases where a sense of commitment arises more implicitly through shared action and mutual expectation.
Wow.
It builds on that fundamental human tendency to create and respond to expectations simply by initiating and persisting in goal-directed behavior.
What's truly fascinating here is how these incredibly abstract ideas about commitment aren't just theoretical constructs. Researchers have actually put these hypotheses to the test, gathering compelling empirical evidence that reveals the cues our brains pick up on.
Right, moving from theory to the lab.
One powerful cue for commitment is perceived effort. Tell us about the snake game experiment.
It's a clever setup. In the snake game experiment, participants played a two-player version where they controlled the left-right movement, and an algorithm presented as their partner controlled the up-down movement.
Okay, playing with a computer partner.
Right. But before each round, the supposed partner had to solve CAPTCHAs to unlock the game. In one condition, the CAPTCHAs were difficult, high effort. In another, they were easy, low effort.
Manipulating perceived effort.
Exactly. The fascinating finding was that participants persisted significantly longer in the high-effort condition. This implies that simply perceiving their partner's greater effort, even if this was just an algorithm, boosted their own sense of commitment to the shared task.
Just thinking the partner worked harder made them try harder.
That's what it suggests. It wasn't about the partner's actual intelligence or human obligation, but the signal of effort. A follow-up study using a boring, effortful spacebar task yielded similar results. Participants persisted longer and performed better when they believed their partner had put in more effort.
Consistent finding, then.
And perhaps most strikingly, a human-robot interaction study using the same snake game paradigm found the identical pattern. Participants persisted longer when their robot partner was perceived to have invested more effort.
Even with a robot. That's wild.
It suggests it's a very basic, general heuristic, deeply ingrained through evolution or extensive routinization, operating almost automatically.
That's remarkable that we extend this to robots. It suggests something very fundamental about how we interpret effort. What about other situational factors that cue commitment?
Another significant situational factor is coordination. Researchers conducted a study using videos of two individuals cleaning sand piles. In the high coordination condition, they formed a chain, efficiently passing buckets to each other.
Working together smoothly.
Right. In the low coordination condition, they worked in parallel with separate buckets, but the overall effectiveness was carefully matched to the high coordination scenario.
So same result, different method.
Exactly. Observers were then asked to estimate how long the helper would persist when tempted to leave the task. The results consistently showed that observers expected the helper to persist significantly longer in the high coordination condition.
Just seeing them work together made people assume more commitment.
It seems so. The more interdependent and coordinated the interaction appeared, the higher the perceived commitment. A human-robot variant of this study, where a human helped a robot clean toys, also showed that perceived coordination correlated with expected persistence.
Again with the robots.
It suggested the very act of smoothly coordinating and becoming interdependent with another creates a powerful implicit social pressure to continue, a heightened sense of obligation.
And finally, repetition, something we see in so many of our daily interactions. How does repeated interaction build commitment?
Repetition is surprisingly potent. Consider the Polly and Pam vignette study. Participants were asked to imagine a scenario where Polly and Pam had a daily coffee break. If Pam didn't show up, participants were asked how annoyed they would be and whether they expected an apology.
Okay, a simple scenario.
The crucial manipulation was whether this daily habit had gone on for years versus just days. The findings were clear. Participants were significantly more annoyed and expected apologies if the habit had gone on for years, indicating that mere repetition, the shared history of this routine, had given rise to a stronger, implicit sense of commitment.
Just doing it longer built expectations.
Precisely. A lab-based study further confirmed this. Participants showed higher commitment, meaning they were more resistant to tempting outside offers when playing a cooperative game with a fixed partner over many trials, compared to playing with variable partners on each trial.
Even without feedback.
Even when there was no direct feedback given to the partner, showing that the shared history of repeated coordination, even if implicit, strengthens commitment. What's truly insightful is the idea that these factors, perceived effort, coordination, and repetition, might all converge on a single unifying principle. They all serve as evidence of a partner's effort investment.
So it all comes back to effort.
Coordination requires effort to adapt to another. Repetition involves repeatedly investing effort. This suggests a compelling, overarching account for how our minds process these social cues and infer commitment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it means our understanding of commitment needs to move beyond just formal intentions or explicit obligations. It's also profoundly about the underlying psychological machinery that drives us.
Definitely.
Our sources introduce a really novel and important distinction between two forms of commitment that feel very different from the inside.
Indeed. This is the distinction between engaged commitment and gritted teeth commitment. These two forms are orthogonal to the individual versus social distinction, meaning either can apply to either.
Engaged versus gritted teeth.
Okay. Engaged commitment describes a truly positive, almost effortless experience of the task itself. When you're in this state, time seems to fly by. You're intrinsically motivated, deeply focused, and you don't need to consciously concentrate on external rewards or reminders.
It's like being in the zone.
Exactly. Think of someone completely immersed in a beloved hobby, losing track of hours, or genuinely enjoying time with a romantic partner, feeling absolutely no conflict in choosing to be with them over any alternative. The action itself is its own reward.
That sounds like a dream state. But then there's the other side of the coin, which probably feels a lot more familiar to most of us.
Precisely.
Yeah.
In stark contrast, gritted teeth commitment is when you actively force yourself to continue despite internal conflict, aversion, or distraction.
A willpower struggle.
Yes. It's often stressful, requiring significant willpower and a conscious focus on extrinsic rewards to keep going. If you're helping a friend paint a room and the task is utterly boring, you might grit your teeth and push through, focusing on the future gratitude of your friend or the satisfaction of a completed job.
Right, focusing on the reward, not the task.
Or, remaining loyal to a romantic partner despite tempting alternatives might involve actively avoiding thoughts of other people or deliberately suppressing doubts. That active internal struggle, that need for a conscious effort to maintain the commitment, is the hallmark of gritted teeth commitment.
So one feels good, the other feels hard.
One is driven by intrinsic enjoyment and seamless integration, the other by willpower and external motivators, a conscious overcoming of internal friction.
So if these two forms of commitment feel so different, how are researchers actually able to tell the difference? How do they probe the underlying mechanisms?
Researchers are getting incredibly creative with this. One innovative method involves analyzing movement trajectories. In a study with children, they were asked to collect balls for an experimenter. A second experimenter then tried to lure them away with a distracting, fun alternative game.
Okay, testing their focus.
The researchers measured the subtle curvature of the children's walking path. If a child started to veer even slightly towards the distraction, but then visibly curved their path back towards the main task, it provided a quantifiable sign of gritted teeth commitment. They were persisting despite the distraction, actively overriding an impulse.
You could literally see the struggle in their path.
Exactly. If they just walked a straight line directly to the main task without any deviation, it suggested engaged commitment. They were simply less distracted in the first place, fully absorbed by the primary goal. The same approach can even be applied to minute mouse movements in computer tasks, offering a window into our internal struggles.
That's incredibly insightful, watching the subtle physical tells. What about internal cognitive measures?
For internal cognitive measures, they often use attention measures. For instance, the SART, or Sustained Attention to Response task, is a classic gonna-go task, where participants press a spacebar for any digit except 3.
A test of focus and response inhibition.
Right. Errors, specifically pressing the spacebar when a 3 appears, indicate a momentary lapse in attention. Typically, after making an error, participants show a post-error deceleration. They slow down on subsequent trials to re-establish their focus.
Slowing down after messing up makes sense.
What the researchers found was a more pronounced post-error deceleration in the high-effort condition, where participants believed their partner had to solve difficult CAPTOUs, compared to the low-effort condition.
So thinking their partner worked harder made them focus more after an error.
That's the implication. It suggests that the perceived partner effort boosted the participants' executive control functions, specifically inhibitory control, suppressing the wrong response, and working memory updating, keeping the rule in mind. In essence, it provided empirical support for the gritted teeth form of commitment, showing people actively marshaling their cognitive resources to stay on task when the perception of partner's effort amplified their sense of obligation.
Wow, measuring the brain's effort directly.
It's a deep dive into the very cognitive processes that enable our willpower.
So we've explored the sophisticated machinery of adult commitment, but what does this tell us about where our capacity for commitment comes from in the first place, especially in early development?
This is where our sources propose something truly profound. That children don't just acquire a concept of commitment through abstract teaching, but rather develop a more basic, fundamental, intuitive sense of commitment that forms the bedrock for later, more complex understanding.
An intuition, not just a learned rule.
Right. This proficiency seems to unfold in a progression of 3 developmental steps. First, basic, innate psychological mechanisms motivate a child to contribute when a minimal structure is present, for instance, if an adult clearly desires an outcome, and the child's contribution is clearly crucial to achieving it.
Like helping instinctively.
Second, these basic mechanisms then lead the child to form expectations that a crucial contribution will occur, either from themselves or from others.
Expecting help, or feeling expected to help.
And third, over time, these innate expectations and motivations reinforce each other, continuously calibrating through countless social experiences to form a more mature and proficient ability to manage and engage in commitments.
Learning through doing, essentially.
Pretty much.
That leads to an intriguing idea called goal slippage, doesn't it?
It does. Goal slippage is an incredibly intuitive idea. It describes a phenomenon where an observed goal or action, if it's within one's own motor repertoire, can almost automatically become the observer's own goal, leading to an automatic, often unconscious action to complete it.
Like seeing someone drop something and picking it up without thinking.
Exactly. Imagine someone trying to toss a pillow onto a sofa, and it rolls off onto the floor, unnoticed by them. You might instinctively and seamlessly pick it up and place it on the sofa for them. You're effectively helping to complete their unfinished action because their goal slipped into your own motor system, compelling you to complete it.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Our sources also offer a fascinating speculation that our sophisticated adult sense of outrage when commitments are violated, that deep indignation we feel when someone breaks a promise or lets us down, might actually stem from a very basic, almost instinctual sense of frustration.
Like primal anger.
Think of the visceral annoyance you feel when a drawer won't close smoothly, and you might even curse at it. That same raw, primal frustration when directed at a social violation might be the emotional bedrock of our moral outrage at broken promises.
Wow. Connecting stubbed toes to broken treaties.
Metaphorically, maybe. And finally, over time, this powerful, innate sense of commitment becomes calibrated to the specific social norms within a given culture.
Learning the local rules.
This calibration helps us learn the subtle, unwritten rules, determining precisely when it's appropriate to contribute, when to expect contributions, and what constitutes a violation. This also elegantly explains why some individuals might seem over or under-committed in certain situations. Their intuitive sense of commitment might simply be calibrated differently from the prevailing social expectations of their group.
So it's nature and nurture tuning our commitment level.
It's a continuous learning process throughout life. 2. The philosophy of the classroom. Teachers, beliefs, and autonomy.
All right, let's smoothly transition from the broad landscape of human commitment to a very specific yet incredibly impactful domain, education. We're now going to unpack how a teacher's deeply held core beliefs, their educational philosophy, profoundly shape their professional freedom and decision-making within the classroom.
Yeah, a really different angle, but just as important.
This is where our second source truly shines a light. It frames education not just as a practical endeavor, but as a rich, applied philosophy. It draws heavily on deeper philosophical branches. From metaphysics, which explores the nature of reality and being,
Big question,
to epistemology, which asks how we know what we know, and axiology, which delves into what we value.
What matters?
John Dewey, arguably one of the most famous philosophers and educational theorists of the 20th century, even saw the philosophy of education as the most important and main branch of philosophy, akin to the very philosophy of life itself.
High praise indeed.
And in the very practical, day-to-day world of the classroom, teachers are undeniably seen as the most important component in the learning-teaching process when it comes to effectively implementing any curriculum. They are the frontline architects of learning.
It's fascinating because this highlights the immense power a teacher wields, even within a structured system. What's truly interesting here is how history shows us distinct philosophical traditions that have profoundly influenced how education is delivered across cultures and generations.
Okay, so there are different schools of thought.
Right. Our sources identify 4 dominant educational philosophies that broadly fall into 2 main categories: traditional and contemporary.
Traditional and contemporary.
On the traditional side, we have perennialism and essentialism. Perennialism is deeply focused on preserving existing societal structures, and particularly emphasizes the major works of Western civilization as the core curriculum.
Like the classics.
Exactly. Here, the teacher is the sole, undisputed authority transmitting timeless knowledge. A perennialist classroom might look like a professor delivering lectures on classic texts, with students primarily absorbing information and engaging in rigorous, often rote memorization.
Very top-down.
Essentialism shares this focus on preserving existing structures and teacher authority, but it places a stronger emphasis on the efficient transfer of society's cultural structures, the essential skills and knowledge to the next generations.
It's the basics, the fundamentals.
Right. An essentialist classroom would be highly structured, perhaps with a clear emphasis on the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, standardized tests, and direct instruction, ensuring students master foundational knowledge before moving on.
Structured and efficient.
The common characteristics of these traditional philosophies include prioritizing specific course subjects, utilizing traditional teaching methods like blackboards and textbooks, often ignoring or actively discouraging active student engagement, and tending towards an authoritarian classroom style. They're generally less flexible with the curriculum, as knowledge is seen as fixed and to be transmitted.
So essentially a more rigid, teacher-centric approach. What about the contemporary philosophies?
On the contemporary side, we find progressivism and reconstructionism. Progressivism is a radical departure. It's decidedly learner-centered, prioritizing student interests and needs, with the teacher acting much more as a guide, a facilitator, rather than a sole authority.
More like a coach than a lecturer.
Exactly. The core philosophy here is that knowledge is not a fixed entity to be passively received. Instead, it's dynamic, can be modified by context, and is often actively constructed by the individual through experience and interaction.
Learning by doing.
A progressive classroom would be buzzing with activity, group projects, hands-on experiments, inquiry-based learning, and discussions tailored to student questions. Reconstructionism shares similar philosophical foundations with progressivism, but expands its focus significantly. It centers on social transformation, aiming to use education as a powerful tool to identify and address societal problems and ultimately improve society.
Education for social change.
Right. A Reconstructionist teachers might lead students in projects focused on social justice, environmental issues, or community activism. The characteristics of contemporary philosophies generally include promoting active student involvement, encouraging teachers to collaborate with students, being open to change, and employing much more flexible and adaptable practices in curriculum delivery.
So much more student-focused and flexible.
These philosophical leanings aren't just academic. They directly impact every decision an educator makes.
That paints a really clear picture of how different a classroom environment can be based on these underlying beliefs. So how does all of this connect to a teacher's autonomy, their professional freedom to make decisions?
It's a direct link. Our sources define teacher autonomy as the freedom teachers possess in planning, implementing and assessing instruction, and making various decisions within their professional work environment.
Their wiggle room, basically.
Kind of. It's not a monolithic concept. It has 2 crucial subdimensions: the ability to take independent action within the educational setting itself, and independence from external control or directives.
Freedom in the classroom and freedom from outside rules.
You got it. This also isn't a binary state of yes or no autonomy. There's a spectrum. It ranges from no autonomy, where a teacher's opinions are not sought or valued, all the way to complete autonomy, where they have full authority within ethical and legal bounds.
A whole range of freedom.
For our deep dive, we're focusing specifically on curriculum autonomy, which is essentially the freedom to decide what is taught in the classroom.
The what versus the how.
Precisely. The positive impact of teacher autonomy is broadly and consistently recognized. It's linked to higher job satisfaction, greater teacher empowerment, increased engagement in their profession, and overall enhanced professionalism. It's widely considered crucial for effective schooling practices, allowing teachers to adapt and innovate for their unique student populations.
So it's not just a perk. It's seen as a vital ingredient for good education. This raises an important question about how this plays out in real-world systems, especially those with central control over education. Tell us about the Turkish context where this study was conducted.
Right, context is key here. The Turkish context is critical for understanding the study's findings. In Turkey, there is significant state control over school and classroom curriculum decision-making.
So top down from the government.
Exactly. This means that content, learning aims, specific goals, and objectives are centrally prescribed for teachers by a national ministry. This creates a very particular environment.
Less freedom for the teacher on what to teach.
Correct. Such a centralized system can often lead to teachers feeling unimportant or disempowered in the curriculum planning process, as their direct input on what to teach is restricted. It can even be perceived as a deprofessionalizing force, as it reduces their scope for independent decision-making on core instructional content, essentially making them implementers rather than designers of curriculum.
Just following orders in a way.
That's the potential feeling. This inherent tension between centralized control and a teacher's desire for professional autonomy is what the study aimed to explore.
So, given that context of centralized control, what did the research in Turkey actually find when looking at teachers' philosophical leanings and their perceived autonomy? The key research findings were quite illuminating.
They certainly were. First, regarding the dominant philosophy among the surveyed teachers, it was overwhelmingly a progressive educational philosophy that was most adopted, while essentialism was the least adopted.
So, more contemporary, despite the system.
Yes. This finding makes a lot of sense in the Turkish context, as the national educational system has been deliberately shifting toward a constructivist approach, a pedagogical philosophy, where students are actively building their own knowledge through experience, rather than passively receiving it since the 2004-2005 academic year.
The system itself was pushing that way?
Right. Constructivism itself is largely based on pragmatism, which aligns closely with the tenets of progressivism. This correlation suggests that prolonged exposure to a system influenced by a particular educational theory profoundly impacts teachers' own philosophical tendencies, almost shaping their professional mindset over time.
So their environment shapes their beliefs. But despite this centralized control, what about their perceived autonomy?
Intriguingly, despite the pervasive centralized control, teachers actually reported surprisingly high levels of overall curriculum autonomy.
Really? High autonomy? How?
Well, when they broke down this perceived autonomy into its constituent parts, a clearer picture emerged. Procedural autonomy, their freedom in how they efficiently implement the learning teaching process, the methods and strategies they use day to day, was reported as the highest.
Freedom in the how, not the what.
Exactly. This is key. It implies that even if what they teach is largely mandated, teachers feel a significant degree of flexibility in how they deliver that content, how they engage students, how they manage their classrooms. Conversely, autonomy in planning was the lowest.
Which makes sense with the central curriculum.
This directly reflects the constraint of the centralized curriculum, where the core content and objectives are predetermined, leaving less room for teachers to decide on the fundamental what.
So they have freedom in method, but less in content. And how did their philosophical leanings predict this autonomy?
This is where the predictive power of philosophy really comes into play. Progressive educational philosophy emerged as the strongest predictor of perceived autonomy.
The progressives felt more free.
Yes. It showed a moderately positive correlation with procedural autonomy and a low positive correlation with autonomy in professional development, planning, and evaluation. More importantly, it significantly predicted both procedural autonomy and autonomy in professional development.
So that belief system actually predicted how much freedom they felt they had in how they taught and grew.
Precisely. What this indicates is that teachers who hold a progressive mindset, those who believe in student-centered learning, flexibility, and active construction of knowledge, are more likely to structure their own professional development and carry out the learning-teaching process without heavy reliance on external factors. They find ways to exercise their autonomy, even within a centrally controlled system.
They make the most of the freedom they do have.
Exactly. In stark contrast, Reconstructionist, essentialist, and perennialist philosophies had no significant predictive effect on curriculum autonomy.
So the traditional philosophies didn't connect to feelings of autonomy.
Not in a predictive way, according to this study. This all leads to a crucial takeaway. A teacher's deeply held philosophical beliefs aren't just abstract academic concepts. They directly shape how much freedom and influence that teacher feels they have in their classroom, and ultimately, how they navigate their professional growth.
Wow.
Teachers with contemporary progressive mindsets appear better equipped to utilize and maximize their perceived autonomy, while more traditional beliefs can inadvertently act as internal barriers to exercising that freedom. It's a powerful illustration of how our internal frameworks dictate our external actions. 3. The simp phenomenon. excessive romantic behaviors in the modern world.
All right, let's pivot completely now. We've talked about deep-seated commitments that underpin society, and then how professional roles are shaped by philosophical beliefs. Now, we're going to delve into a very modern and sometimes quite controversial aspect of human interaction, simping behavior in romantic contexts.
Okay, shifting gears quite a bit here.
Our third source takes us on a fascinating deep dive into this pop culture phenomenon and what it might reveal about our underlying human mating strategies. We all know the nerve-wracking tightrope walk involved in romantic pursuit, don't we? How much effort is truly optimal when you're trying to attract a new romantic interest?
Yeah, that age-old question.
You want to put your best foot forward, show genuine interest and value, but you absolutely don't want to come across as too overbearing or worse, desperate. The source really highlights this delicate balancing act.
That's a fine line.
While individuals obviously differ in their romantic gestures, most would agree there's a clear limit. The research points out that incessant displays of affection or premature, intense gestures like saying, "I love you" after a first date or offering to move in together after only a few weeks can actually backfire spectacularly, putting off potential partners entirely.
Yeah, it can be a major turnoff.
It's about finding that elusive sweet spot where you show interest without triggering alarm bells.
What's truly fascinating here is how this seemingly playful pop culture term, simping, actually connects directly to established and much more serious psychological concepts of problematic pursuit.
So it's not just a meme term.
Not entirely. Simping isn't just internet slang. It aligns with clinical terms like undesired pursuit behaviors, UPBs, obsessive relational intrusion, ORI, and even at its extreme, stalking behaviors.
Okay, UPBs, ORI, serious stuff.
Right. These are broadly defined in psychological literature as persistent, undesired pursuit behaviors directed toward an individual with whom the actor is currently not involved in a consensual romantic relationship. We're talking about actions that go beyond normal courtship and become intrusive or unwanted.
Like what kind of actions?
Typical obsessive acts include things like repeatedly waiting outside someone's residence or workplace without invitation, sending an endless stream of unwanted gifts, or leaving frequent unsolicited messages, phone calls, texts, emails that are clearly not reciprocated or desired.
Definitely crosses a line.
It's also crucial to note that these problematic behaviors often share a common underlying motivation. The actor's desperate attempt to restore a previously dissolved romantic relationship, even when the other person has clearly moved on.
Trying to win someone back, even when it's over.
This shows a deep-seated, often maladaptive drive.
That's a serious connection, moving it from meme to something with real-world implications. So why would someone engage in these types of behaviors, even when they seem so clearly counterproductive and often repel the very person they're trying to attract?
Good question. Our source brings in an evolutionary psychology lens, looking at what they call the sexual economics of courtship.
Sexual economics. Sounds interesting.
It's a compelling framework. From an evolutionary standpoint, the argument goes that women are generally the choosier sex in mate selection.
Why is that?
This is due to the inherent biological asymmetry. A woman's investment in reproduction, pregnancy, childbirth, nursing, is significantly higher and more costly than a man's. Because of this, their mate preferences are more uncompromisingly intertwined with female sexual access, meaning they are more selective about who they grant access to for reproduction.
Higher stakes for women, basically.
Consequently, women are often perceived as the gatekeepers of relationships, effectively withholding the highly valued resource of sex from men. This dynamic, in turn, gives women more power to shape and influence the relationship from its inception.
Women as gatekeepers, okay.
Historically, and this preference has been remarkably consistent across both Eastern and Western cultures, women show a strong, consistent preference for men of high social status as long-term mates.
Status matters. Why status specifically?
Because high social status in ancestral environments directly correlated with better access to vital resources and a greater ability to provide for offspring. This preference for status often overrides other desirable traits like creativity or friendliness when it comes to long-term partnering.
Resources and provision makes evolutionary sense.
This fundamental evolutionary dynamic then sets the stage for intense intersexual competition among men, who historically compete fiercely to attract and secure desirable mates.
Men competing with each other for female attention.
Right.
That makes sense in an ancestral context. But then if these simping behaviors are so excessive and often ineffective today, how do they fit into this evolutionary framework? Is it a glitch in the system?
That's precisely where the concept of modern maladaptation comes in. The core argument is that we are currently experiencing an evolutionarily novel increase in intersexual competition in the modern world.
Evolutionarily novel, meaning new in evolutionary terms.
Exactly. In our contemporary, globalized, and hyper-connected society, individuals are no longer just competing for mates within their small village or tribe. Thanks to things like online dating apps and social media, we are now competing against an immensely greater number of equally attractive same-sex rivals than our ancestors ever did.
A much bigger dating pool and much more competition.
This intensely high level of competition pushes evolved psychological mechanisms that were designed to operate in a very different, less competitive ancestral environment to produce maladaptive behaviors.
Maladaptive, so not helpful anymore.
Right. They become maladaptive because they simply can't process the drastically mismatched input of our modern dating landscape. What might have been a mildly effective, costly signal of commitment in a smaller, more localized competitive environment can now become completely counterproductive, excessive, and even off-putting in a vastly expanded, fast-moving dating market.
So our brains haven't caught up with Tinder.
You could put it that way. It's our ancient hardware trying to run modern software, and sometimes it glitches.
That's a powerful idea. Our evolved behavior struggling to keep up with our rapidly changing social environment. So to really understand this simp phenomenon, researchers conducted a study. What did they actually find about its underlying facets?
To get to the bottom of simping, the researchers conducted a study using an exploratory factor analysis with 299 male participants. This statistical method helps identify underlying, unobserved factors from a larger set of observed variables, essentially. It helps group together behaviors that tend to occur together.
Looking for patterns in the behavior.
Right. The study successfully identified 4 distinct factors of simping behavior, which collectively accounted for nearly 43% of the total variance in observed behaviors. It provides a much more nuanced understanding than the simple slang term.
Okay, 4 factors. Tell us about them.
The largest and arguably most surprising factor, accounting for nearly 24% of the variance, was undesirability low mate value.
Undesirability. So feeling not good enough.
This factor included items related to someone perceiving themselves as having low mate value, essentially, feeling undesirable as a romantic partner. This suggests that simping can, in part, be driven by a deep-seated insecurity, an overcompensation born from a belief that one isn't naturally attractive enough to secure a partner.
Trying too hard because of insecurity. Okay, what's next?
The second factor was exploitative superiority complex.
Exploitative superiority. That sounds negative.
It captured items related to benevolent and patronizing attitudes toward women, such as the belief that women inherently need men's protection or care, even in a way that infantilizes them.
Like a white knight complex, maybe?
Something like that. This is a counterintuitive finding, suggesting that some simping might be rooted not in genuine affection, but in a subtle, controlling dynamic.
That's quite a twist. What about the behaviors we typically associate with simping?
That falls under the third factor, obsessive-excessive behaviors. This factor, surprisingly, combined what were initially thought to be distinct facets into one coherent category.
The over-the-top stuff.
Exactly. It encompasses overt actions like displays excessive affection and care, far beyond what's reciprocated or appropriate for the stage of the relationship, and spends excessive amounts of money on a romantic interest, often to impress or buy affection. These are the classic simp actions.
Buying gifts, constant texting, that kind of thing.
Right. Finally, the fourth factor was competent efficacious.
Wait, competent? How does that fit with simping?
Good question. This factor involved traits like being popular and well-liked by individuals of the opposite sex. This is perhaps the most intriguing and seemingly contradictory finding.
How can someone who is competent and efficacious also be engaging in simping?
It's just a complex nuance. Perhaps this factor captures situations where even high-value individuals engage in what is perceived as excessive behavior, maybe as an over-the-top display of their competence or resources.
Like flexing too hard.
Or it points to a particular type of simping that is less about insecurity and more about a misplaced or over-the-top attempt to impress. It certainly challenges the simplistic notion that only undesirable individuals simp.
It certainly adds a lot of layers to the term, moving it beyond a mere insult. And what's truly significant here is that simping isn't just about an awkward social encounter or a funny internet meme.
No, definitely not just a joke.
The research highlights that these behaviors can have serious real-world consequences, going far beyond just being cringeworthy.
Absolutely. The study explicitly emphasizes that simping behaviors have significant actor-partner ramifications. This means they negatively affect both the person engaging in the behavior and the target of that behavior.
Hurts both people involved.
Right. For the actor, the person simping it can lead to emotional distress, shame, social isolation, and a damaging cycle of self-perpetuating low self-worth if their efforts are consistently rejected.
A downward spiral.
And for the partner, the target of these behaviors, it can range from mild discomfort and annoyance to significant emotional distress, feelings of being objectified, invaded, or even fear, especially if the behaviors escalate towards obsessive relational intrusion or stalking.
Yeah, it can get scary.
This moves the discussion firmly beyond pop culture into serious relationship dynamics and individual well-being. It underscores that while the term might sound lighthearted, the underlying behaviors can be quite detrimental to all parties involved. And as these patterns become more prevalent in hyper-connected societies, understanding their negative impacts becomes increasingly important.
This raises a really important, perhaps even provocative question for you, the listener, and certainly for future research. Are these simping behaviors, costly as they are in terms of effort, money, and social capital, actually effective in achieving their ultimate evolutionary goal of mate acquisition?
The million-dollar question,
Yeah.
right? Does it actually work?
In other words, does engaging in more simping behaviors actually lead to greater success in acquiring mates, despite seeming counterproductive on the surface? While it appears costly and often maladaptive in the modern context, as we discussed, the source hints it could be adaptive under certain conditions if it secures a certain degree of reproductive fitness in the long run.
A sliver of potential evolutionary logic, maybe.
It leaves us with a fascinating open-ended thought. Despite the immediate social drawbacks, might there be a deeper, complex, and perhaps even uncomfortable evolutionary calculus at play for some individuals that still makes these costly behaviors a viable, albeit fraught, strategy for mate acquisition, particularly in a hyper-competitive mating landscape? Something to chew on. All right, so what does this all mean? We've truly journeyed far today, from the fundamental, invisible glue of human commitment that allows societies to function,
And the bedrock stuff.
through the profound philosophical underpinnings that guide a teacher's autonomy in the classroom,
Shaping young minds.
and even into the surprising, sometimes uncomfortable world of simping behavior in modern romantic pursuits.
Quite the spectrum.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can truly appreciate how seemingly disparate areas of human experience are, in fact, deeply intertwined.
They really are connected.
They are all influenced by underlying psychological mechanisms, shaped by complex social dynamics, and even driven by ancient evolutionary pressures.
It's all playing out.
The way we individually commit to a personal goal, the philosophical framework that empowers a teacher's autonomy, or the intricate, sometimes maladaptive patterns observed in romantic pursuit, they're all different facets of the same fundamental challenge: how we navigate our profoundly complex social world, manage our desires, and interact with others.
Yeah, it's all about navigating life as a human, really.
This deep dive today then reveals that whether it's sticking to a fitness plan, empowering an entire profession, or navigating the tricky, often awkward waters of attraction, there is always, always more beneath the surface than meets the eye.
So much complexity.
Understanding these intricate layers doesn't just give us a superficial overview. It provides new, powerful tools to truly appreciate the why behind human action, offering those profound aha moments that you came for.
Hopefully a few light bulbs went off for you.
And that leads to a crucial question for you to mull over long after this deep dive concludes. Considering the subtle cues that build and break commitment, the undeniable power of personal philosophy in shaping professional freedom, and the complex evolutionary drivers behind even the most puzzling romantic behaviors.
Thinking about all three pieces.
How might your newfound understanding of these intricate dynamics change the way you approach your own commitments, the decisions you make in your professional life, or even the subtle dance of your personal relationships?